Hello, everyone. Today, my topic is diversity and cultural leadership in the workplace. To talk about diversity, first, we need to take some steps back to look at the history of the workplace and our society. The United States has been a male-dominated nation. Its economy, institutions, even it's the Constitution that we hold so dearly today, were designed and were created and designed to advance whites. And unfortunately to say, but it's a reality at the expense of blacks and other races. And this is evident in the extermination of Indians, the Native American Indians that own this land, the institution of slavery, Jim Crow laws, which limit the people's personal and economic freedoms, um, specifically for the non-whites. So the politicization of society, our cultural norms, became the value on which this country was founded, and it also translate to the workplace practices, which substantiated the male-dominated workforce. So to understand diversity today, we need to take a look at at its background, which I just articulated briefly. But these imposition on other people not only was limited to blacks. Let's take a look at white women, which didn't have the rights to vote. They had to fight against the system, despite their color, to be able to have the freedom to vote. So in the 1920s, they were from a country that was founded centuries before. It was not until the 1920s that white women had the right to vote. Up until that time, only white male were able to vote. In the 1960s, the civil rights movement magnified the cause and the plight and injustices suffered by blacks. All right. So due to that, you know, laws were passed that addressed these societal ills, and also to be able to improve or provide space for blacks and other minorities in the workforce. So, which makes us jump to the 1960s forward about our diversity programs. So initially, diversity programs were introduced to address racial discrimination, not only in the workplace, but in our society, right? And the way these diversity programs were, came, the way it operated was practically to facilitate meaningful discussion on race relations, right? Groups came together where they will have quote unquote real, honest, difficult, challenging conversations, uh, so that way they to come to an understanding. The military, for example, use this method to be able to try to find consensus and be able to promote uh, diversity within its ranks. Was this 100% fruitful? Well, it was a good start, but far from being effective. In the 1980s and the 1990s, there was a corporations continue to invest in diversity programs, but during these decades, these corporations use diversity programs primarily to defend against civil lawsuits. right? So there was a conscious movement that was going on in the country, and instead of using the programs to advance uh, opportunities for underrepresented communities, these programs were being used to defend against lawsuits uh, against the very people that it was intended to help, right? But at the same time, during this period, there was a shift in the practices of businesses. They started to recognize the importance of diversity training program beyond racial matters. As a result, diversity programs were expanded and became a little more inclusive to address ethnicity, religion, gender, and it was also the beginning of uh, including LGBTQ plus community into the diversity education programs. So as a result, they embrace diversity education and also the recognition of diverse needs faced by various different groups within our society and the workplace. With the same token, with globalization um, and the world becoming much, much smaller, uh, globalization promoted multiculturalism, right? So, what do I mean by this? There was a training emphasize people's cultural identity. Corporations and businesses uh, recognize that people's race is no longer sufficient to be addressed by diversity programs. They have different challenges, they have different realities, and these two must be addressed. Um, so multiculturalism through globalism acknowledges people's unique identities and qualities, and as a result, the arena, workplace, the business world uh, strives to create an inclusive and equitable arena, as I mentioned, beyond one's race. So inclusive diversity training programs were created that address and consider unique challenges faced by different identity groups. Interactive and engaging training sessions were created, which incorporate real life examples from different cultures, different societies to promote understanding and connection within the workplace and in society. But again, there was another shift. In mid in 2010, the early parts of the decade, or in the middle of the decade, there was a shift once again, which was led by the social justice movement. For example, the Me Too movement. We're talking about Black Lives Matter, so on and so forth. And these movements highlights the inequality, the racial, political, and economic injustices that's still prevalent in the United States today, right? So the business world and our society responded with a renewed urgency of inclusiveness, not only at our jobs, but also within our communities, right? Organizations became to also help subscribe to these movements by becoming more engaged, more compelling, and more culturally aware to the plight of minorities in the United States and in the community. And as a result, they created environments where people contributed to the positive change that these movements were highlighted and trying to change within our society. So there was increased accessibility and broader participation, not only by one segment of society, but a larger population, which uh, that goes beyond one's identity, one's race, and one's socioeconomic class, right? So there was a creation of inclusive workplace cultures and improved organizational performance that was based on these movements. However, that was short-lived, right? As the fight continued, the dominant group also becomes threatened by what was going on. And as a result, there was a backlash against these movements. So as we can see, for example, in 2023, 2024, Congress, so a segment of Congress um, uh, pushed back against these movements. And also there was decisions by the United States Supreme Court that helped to, for lack of a better word, eradicate some of the gains that diversity, equity, and inclusion has gained in our society and in the workplace. You know, this pushback was primarily um, led by the political right, but that is a conversation for a different presentation and a different day. So, what would leaders in diversity in our organizations, in our corporations, in our colleges, whatever have you? How can we move diversity, equity, inclusion in the workforce? Well, it takes a collective, right? In this case, it takes a village. But it is very important that senior leaders, uh, organizational leaders, must be in the front lines. They must they cannot lead from behind. They have to champion and be cheerleaders. They must buy in to diversity, to inclusion, and they must embrace the process. In other words, they must cut and build an infrastructure uh, and stick to it. So that way, um, the organization and the workplace can be engaging and embrace the collective and diverse and cultural richness of its people, right? But this is a very delicate matter because we have already seen that when diversity is push and inclusivity is push, or there is also a pushback from the dominant group that feels that they're losing their rights. So leaders must also be able to navigate and walk that line where they can embrace and engage all sides without losing a certain group. As we know that leaders who passionately, genuinely, and wholeheartedly support diversity initiatives can have an can be infectious, and it can literally um, garner support from their followers to be able to participate and fully move the process along and building a culture that that's willing to fight, that's willing to uh, be open-minded and have challenging conversations, not only for the individual benefit, but for the collective as a whole. As we may know, that when leaders are not engaged in this process, when they're not committed, and when they just walk the walk and do not talk the talk, the people become disengaged, right? There's no commitment whatsoever to be able to follow through on what's being trying to achieve. And not only that, the organization suffers, and the people who make up the organizations also suffers. So this can be manifested by resentment toward leadership, towards the organization, because of loss of perceived or real loss of opportunities, absenteeism, poor performance. And these are just some of many different reasons why people become disengaged, right? So leaders must do their best and work throughout the agency and collectively to remove those barriers by creating opportunities for qualified candidates um, from underrepresented communities, uh, not as the quote unquote quote affirmative action or you because of your race or your color or because you're part of that group, right? So in essence, diversity should reflect throughout the organization at all levels, right? That's the only way there's going to be buy-in. Um, Starting from the top, there is a void of minority representation, usually in leadership roles, and for diversity to be able to be successful, all levels of organization must have representation by qualified minority candidates. So, what are the organizational consequences when organizations or companies decide to alienate segments of society or other people from within their ranks or qualified candidates or qualified staff that's been bypassed because of whether real or perceived biases or because of lack of buy-in uh, in their diversity programs. Well, I'll present two options. One is open protest, and the next is silent dissent. Right? Open protest happened at Google. Employees walked out because they were very dissatisfied with what was going on, and that was a way of them telling the leadership, "We do not like what's going on." Right? Now we have the silent dissent. Right? That's not a strike. Open protest can also be a strike, which is, the tools usually used by unions and other people, right? Other groups who are dissatisfied with working conditions. Then we have the silent dissent. These are the invisible walkouts. The invisible walkouts happens because people are dissatisfied in their hearts. They feel that their voices are unheard, and management or leaders have dishonored their commitments. So they show up to work every day, but they are not productive. They're not giving their all, right? They have checked out. Why do they check out? Because they feel psychologically unsafe and unvalued. So they stop. They just show up for a paycheck. They don't go above and beyond. They're just there, right? Going through the routine. And as a result, the organization suffers, right? So this is a form of quiet protest, right? Because they become subconsciously disengaged and act against the best interest of the organization. So what do we do? Well, collectively, and leaders uh, must look to be active participants as formula articulated, and be culturally responsible. Right? Open communication is key in every organization, but also there must be a reservoir of trust. Communication without trust is, is a recipe for disaster and is not effective at all. Right? Leaders must proactively ask questions. They must be unafraid to invite input. They must foster what I will call creative conflict, right? We cannot be afraid to talk and deal with the root causes of what we are dealing with in our organizations and in our society. But this must be done with respect, where we can encourage and embrace other people's opinions, even if it makes us uncomfortable. But it's a tool to move towards con- constructiveness and to be able to make the organization and our society much better. So our differences should not be dismissed. Our differences should be embraced, because each person, no matter what your walks of life, brings something of value and of importance to a given situation. And we cannot we cannot fool ourselves by thinking that every issue of diversity, equity, and inclusion is on an organizational level. We all must play our part, because it may be on an individual level, or on a unit-based level, a departmental level. All right. So we have to play our part to be able to identify and elevate these concerns and be able to be willing participants, positive and productive participants in the process. This is the only way we can promote a unifying culture, even during the most difficult conversation, during the most difficult times. Yes, the United States is a male dominated culture, even today. But it's our responsibility to be able to work within said system, to be able to lean and walk towards even in the playing field. There are many people who have the emotional intelligence, who are committed to be able to make the difference, but they cannot go at it alone, whether it's from the dominant group or from the underrepresented group. The only way we can move it together is to be together, to be united, to be open, to be willing. Because today, maybe for you, tomorrow might be for me, as is evident, for example, in South Africa. We cannot lead and walk with fear, because it will paralyze us.